Hello, welcome to this webcast, Empowering Your Team by Building Trust. I'm Carol Gaskell, founder of Full Potential Group, and I'm really delighted to be talking about trust right now because I think it's probably the most essential aspect of team working as we're going through all this change and as we're navigating change. Breaking down silos. I know some people will be remote working right now, and increasing trust will improve our collaboration. It will improve everyone's engagement and motivation, and it has a massive impact on our health and well-being as well as the results we can have in a team. So what I'm going to talk about in this webcast is three aspects. I'm going to look at trust in this new normal and what that actually means and why it's important. I'm going to give you three suggested models of how you can build more trust in your team. And I'll also talk about three mistakes, common mistakes, that hopefully you can avoid in a team. So trusting in this new normal. Some people, their businesses are busier than ever. And therefore, to be able to trust everybody and be able to respect everybody is critical. Other businesses have been affected by the economic downturn, and actually trust is such an important aspect now to hold together and look at how we can together pull together to be stronger. So the thing about trust is teams don't perform well if they don't trust each other. And I think especially where we've got quite a lot of virtual team working right now, some people are saying, well, I'm challenged by trust because I can't look people in the eye. I can't see them in the office like I used to, or I can't see them in the store like I used to. And so therefore, finding ways of building that human connection, that human trust, when you're not always together, adds another dimension to trust. So the key about trust, it's about reliability, sincerity, integrity, being consistent, being committed. And when you fully trust, you believe that someone is good, that they're going to be honest, they're not going to harm you, that things are safe and reliable. And when a team feels that everybody trusts, then you know that you're going to show up as your best. You feel comfortable to be your best self. And the great thing about team trust, and where you've got really high levels of trust in a team, is that the team whole, every single person in the team pulls together and it's greater than the sum of the parts. So really understanding how we can show up and trust each other when we can't always see each other is critical right now. Accenture recently published a competitive agility index, and they said 54% of companies experienced a material drop of trust and lost about $180 billion in revenue. So there are direct financial implications to teams not trusting each other. When it comes to teamwork, are we in the same boat or aren't we? If you think about your team members right now, who do you really trust? Do they have your backs? When we don't trust people, sometimes we become a bit withdrawn. We might become a bit disengaged. We might lack confidence. We might hoard our information, not share it, maybe not even intentionally, but we might play it safe because we're not quite sure where we stand. Are you sure glad the whole isn't at our end? How trusting is your team? Are they watching out for each other? Are you watching out for each other right now? The challenge of trust right now is that, especially if you've got people working from home in your teams, there might be some silo working. Sometimes there can be a little bit of frustration or anger because people don't really know what each other's doing. You might feel that there could be hidden agendas or a little bit of sabotage or surprises in the team because people don't fully trust. So understanding trust is critical. Trust builds that bridge between business results and our human need for connection. And I think right now, as we've been going through isolation and people having to be socially aware of distancing, etc., is we definitely want to get our businesses back on track now. Well, some of those businesses are ahead of the curve, but we've got to pull everybody together so they don't get exhausted, and resilience is key. So building individual and team connection through trust is a critical bridge. And how do we do that? How do we really take that to another level? And I like to link trust with psychological safety, because it's how safe do you feel on the team? because the more safe you feel, the more you're going to trust all your colleagues. And psychological safety actually goes beyond interpersonal trust. It describes the team climate characterized by mutual respect, and people are totally comfortable being themselves. How comfortable are you being your full self right now in the team? I think sometimes, as we've been all going through galvanizing events as the pandemic has presented, it's probably opened up a greater level of honesty in team members. And it's actually, for many teams, it's actually built more trust. And this psychological safety has become even more important. So we do have this human need for connection. So you might want to stop this webcast in a minute and just think about your experience of trust. When did you totally trust somebody? When did you feel safe to be open and honest? And what made that possible for you? Who on the team do you really trust? And what is it about them that allows you to trust? And also, who trusts you? Because we have different levels of trust. And when don't you trust? What are your biggest turn-offs? Because this might be quite a useful conversation to have with your team members to understand what's important, because for different people, different aspects of trust are important. I'm now going to move on to the second part of this webcast. How do you build trust in your team? And I'm going to share 3 different ways of going about it. I'm going to talk about the trust equation. I'm going to talk about the wheel of trust and how you can measure yourself and your team members on 12 essential spokes on the wheel. And I'm also going to talk about the 3 C's of trust. Now, one of these models might really suit you and your team. The trust equation. Trustworthiness equals credibility. So how credible are you? And how credible are your team members? And how much do you value each other's credibility, strengths, and what you bring? Plus reliability. So how reliable are you? Do you say what you and do what you say? And how reliable are your team members? Plus intimacy. Now, intimacy is really interesting for trust. And I think right now it's probably the most critical part of it. Yes, we can build credibility. Yes, we can work on our behaviors and our reliability. But intimacy is into me, you see. How willing are you allowing people to see into you? I think sometimes now, as we've been going through so much change, it's either too busy to allow that intimacy, or actually it's opening up team members to be more intimate. Especially if people are working from home, you're seeing the background of where people are working, you're getting an insight into people's personal lives as part of work. But intimacy is key, and a willingness to show vulnerability and to show part of your real self will allow you to bring more of your real self to the team and enhance trust. But also another critical thing to think about is what reduces trust is what we call self-orientation, when people are out for themselves. So how willing are you to let go of that self aspect and focus on the greater good of the team? Because the more you build your credibility, the more reliable you are, the more willing you are to share yourself and be intimate in a corporate environment. But also the less you're out for yourself and the more you're out for everyone else, the greater the trust. So you might want to consider this with your team members and have a conversation about how you're scoring yourself individually against this equation, but also how does the team score? And what could the team do differently to really boost trustworthiness? The second model I'm going to share is the wheel of trust. And again, with the handout that accompanies this webcast, you might want to look at the wheel now as I'm talking, or you might want to switch off after this section and fill in the wheel. What you'll see on the wheel is 12 spokes. And there are 12 essentials that you can look at to measure yourself on trust, but equally to get your team members to measure themselves. And in effect, score the spokes from 0 in the middle to 10 on the outside of the spoke. And the first aspect I'm going to look at is how true are you to your word? Because if you're true to your word and you keep your promises, you're going to build trust in your team really, really quickly. Second one to think about is how effective is your communication? Are you clear about your commitments? How effectively does the team communicate with each other? How would you score that? Because the more effective you are, the faster you'll build team trust. The third one is making decisions carefully. So this is about thinking before you act, being organized and making sure that everybody's on board as you move forward with the decisions you're making as you manage change. That will build trust. Putting the right amount of consideration in so the team is all on board. How do you score that as yourself and also as the team? How willing are you to show your feelings? I've just spoken about intimacy. So this ability to have an emotional intelligence and share your feelings and be vulnerable with your team members and with other team members with each other will build high levels of trust. So how do you score yourself on that? Being kind and helpful also engenders trust. So it needs to be authentic. So you need to be honest, but how kind are you and caring and empathetic are you with your team members? And how are they with you? I talked about that self-orientation earlier on the trust equation. So it's about avoiding self-promotion. You know, it's about recognizing the team, valuing team members. How do you score yourself on that? And how honest are you? You know, how often do you really tell the truth to everybody in your team? And participating openly is another one to measure. So are you willing to give feedback? Do you throw yourself into the team and are you fully participating in what the team's doing, whether you're working remotely or whether you're together in the same space? And how consistent are you? That reliability aspect. How would you score yourself on that? And how would your team members score you? The willingness to admit mistakes also builds trust. It shows vulnerability, but it builds a greater level of honesty and trust. How do you score yourself on that? And doing what you believe is right. And in the greater good of the team, it's actually standing up for yourself, articulating what you believe. And you might upset team members, but it's about being open and honest and having constructive conversations. So being able to communicate with each other and then come up with something that's mutually acceptable to everybody. But don't just do something if you don't believe in it, because that will leak out that you don't trust and it might undermine trust in the team. So be honest about how you feel. And remember that trust builds gradually. So you can't jump in and force trust on team members. You have to allow it step by step to build. So rank yourself on these and think about what's the biggest gap on the wheel for you. If there was one of these that you could really boost up that would have a big impact on trust for you in the team, which one would it be? The next thing I want to talk about, this is the third and final model to help your team build trust, is a great tool that's created by the Reiner Dimensions of Trust model. And this comes from the Center for Creative Leadership. They talk about 3 key elements to building team trust. And the first one we look at is the trust of character. And what we mean by this is your faith in your team members. So it's being honest about how much does everybody perform as you expect them to? Does everybody in the team have each other's best interests at heart? How good are you at managing expectations and having clear boundaries with each other as a team? How clear and effectively do you delegate? And are you mutually holding each other accountable and keeping your agreements and doing what you say as a team? The more you can build that trust of character, it's reciprocal trust between you and your team members. So how strong is that in your team right now? And you might want to have a conversation with your team members about how would you score that from low, medium to high. Once you trust characters on the team, trusting of communication is key. So how openly do you talk together? Do you talk directly? Do you speak your truth? And are you really airing your honest views on the issues and concerns and opportunities facing your team right now? Are you good and effective at sharing information? Does everybody speak their truth, and do you admit mistakes, and do you give each other constructive feedback? But also, are you maintaining confidentiality in the team so that you can trust and know that you've got each other's back and speak with really good purpose? Are you up for supporting each other and giving that feedback to each other so you can all learn and grow for the greater good of everybody in the team? So how good's your team communication right now? And is there anything you could do to make it even better? And then the third aspect is trusting in capability. It's trusting in the contribution of all your team members. So it's being honest about your own contribution and your own abilities and skills, but it's also sharing and valuing everybody's abilities and skills, knowing what value you bring to the team, allowing people to make decisions, trusting and giving people that space to do what they're brilliant at, and involving others and seeking their input. Because we can build on each other, we can all support each other. And great team working is when we're really valuing the capabilities that everybody brings and pulling that together for the greater good of everybody and helping people learn. So how do you rate your team on the 3 C's of building trust? And you could measure that and have a conversation with each other about what's the one thing that you could do as a team that would make a difference, but also what's the one thing that you could do individually. Because remember, we have to give and receive trust. It is reciprocal, and we create it incrementally. Small things over time build more and more trust. So what's the one for you that's important? Talked about trust in the new normal and 3 ways of building trust. But before I end this webcast, I want to talk about the 3 common mistakes for team trust. And when we look at it, role creep and confusion as to who's doing what can really erode trust. And especially if you're working in a virtual team right now, or some people are working from home, is clarifying and really ensuring understanding of who's doing what on the team, having clear accountabilities and making sure that we're not treading on each other's toes, because that can actually erode trust and it can start creating some conflict in the team that you might not even mean to have. So being honest about who's doing what is key. Again, another mistake that's happening at the moment is people feeling out of sync with the team, feeling on the outside. So how collectively is your team pulling together? And have you got clear ideas and sharing of information? You know, how often do you need meetings? How often do you need regular team catch-ups? Some of you might be catching up every day, several times a day. For some teams, it might be that you have a team catch-up once a week. But how frequently do you need to catch up? And equally, not just team catch-up, but one-to-ones within team members. But also, what's the format? You know, do you want to see each other? And that might be physically if you're in a physical environment together, but it may well be that you're using Teams or technology like Zoom to keep the team connection, or it might be connecting by emails and by WhatsApp, whatever is right for your team. But is everyone sharing the right information so nobody feels out of sync? And also right now, because so much change is going on, some teams are being really busy but not very productive. The whole team is, or sometimes team members are. So the great thing about being in a team is holding each other to account and having that mutual accountability for collective results. Checking back on your team activities and your team priorities. What's most important to the team? What are we mutually agreeing? And how can we support each other to make sure we're managing those expectations? So we're not busy fools, but we're really focusing on the things that are most important for the team. On one of the webinars that's connected with this, Managing Through Change and Really Engaging Behaviors, I talk a lot more about some of the capabilities that you can build to build trust, but also support your teams. So as you think about trust in your team right now, as you start to navigate the future, what actions will you take? How can you build more trust? You might want to think about sharing with your team an understanding of trust and why it's important. And talking to the team about what's our current reality. Where is trust good? Where is it not so good? What could we do more of? What could we do less of? You might talk about stop, start, continue, but be honest with each other. Have conversations about trust. Might even score yourself as low, medium, or high against some of the models I've given you. Secondly, agree how you're going to support each other. What is your ideal in your team? And how can you best help each other? And thirdly, taking mutual accountability, giving each other regular feedback is really key. You know, being honest about obstacles as we're going through change right now will help build more trust. Agreeing actions, staying open and having ongoing learning and reviews as teams so that you can support each other to keep building this trust. Because imagine it's a snowball going down a hill, and we can build more and more trust, which is going to support each other. So understanding that trust does develop over time. And trust has to start with ourselves. So how much do you trust yourself, and how much are you really willing to trust your team members? It's about having empathy and connection, and really be willing to notice that trust can go up and down sometimes depending on behaviors, and thinking about how do you rebuild trust? How do we keep it going? And having ongoing vital conversations is critical to really create that deep connection. Because remember, as human beings, we're meant to be connected, and trust is fundamental to that. So I hope this webcast has given you some ideas of things you can do. You might want to fill in the action plan at the end of the handout that goes with the webcast. But if you were just to do one thing that would make a difference to you to create more trust, and one thing to support your team to trust more, what would they be?